1 month after Wuhan sealed off its borders, its roads are empty and construction sites are abandoned.
You know, when people used to ask me over the years, what is it that I most worry about with regard to emerging infectious diseases, is a respiratory-borne illness that easily spreads from person to person, but that has a high degree of morbidity and mortality. And unfortunately, that's the worst nightmare you could have.
The window of opportunity is narrowing, so we need to act quickly.
We're running out of medication, we're running out of equipment, and we're even running out of oxygen, which is something that patients that have COVID-19 need.
We have now declared a national state of disaster in terms of the Disaster Management Act.
Myself, government ministers and public service chief executives will take a 20% pay cut for the next 6 months, as we acknowledge New Zealanders who are reliant on wage subsidies, taking pay cuts and losing their jobs as a result of COVID-19's global pandemic.
In extraordinary times, ordinary rules don't work.
This is such a big change to the world. In developing countries, act quickly when the number of cases is still fairly low.
Fellow South Africans, this is the most definitive Tumamina moment for our country. I have great trust that our people will respond positively to this call for common action.
Hi everybody, I am going into the ground here. Hi everyone, welcome to the SingularityU South Africa virtual reality event. It's really great to have you all with us here today. If you want to come a bit closer, everyone in the room, you can come a bit closer to me. Thank you for taking the time to be here today during this lockdown. I'm proud to say that in the last 2 years as Man-Made and SingularityU South Africa, we've been dipping our toes into virtual reality. And today I can say that we are deep diving head first now into this platform. We are going through this unprecedented time in our lives where many people are saying that this could be some type of Armageddon, some type of massive change in humanity for the worse. And there are other camps that are saying that this is the earth fighting back, and nature's way of fighting back to pollution. And if you look at Italy, for example, the last 3 months has completely cleared up, and the pollution is all gone. And you're seeing animals roaming the streets of various countries, as well as in the seas, in the dolphins in Venice, which is really incredible. We're going through this moment in time, which can be seen as this defining moment in our lives as humans. And I heard a great thought from Jamie Metzel, one of the Singularity University faculty, where he sees this moment almost the same as as when in World War II, his grandparents were taken out of the village and put into these gas chambers, and some of them that survived were taken on a ship into a new land, into a new world. And that's what I feel like this moment is. It's this new world, this new discovery, where we have such great opportunities to create new, better ways of living for humans. And through these types of crises, some of the greatest companies and organizations have come out, like Disneyland, for instance, after the Great Depression. So we are seeing this rapid virtualization into live streaming and virtual reality. If you think about Zoom, it went from 10 million users to 200 million users just in 2 months. And Facebook and Google announced this morning they're going to be ramping up their efforts into live streaming. And as well as virtual reality, there are many, many different migrations into virtual reality that are happening at this extremely fast pace that we're seeing. And what's also great is that we're seeing humans come together like never before. I recently watched this Pay It Forward concert by Dave Matthews, where from his bedroom, one of the top musicians in the world is playing for free. I mean, this is extraordinary. And he spoke about paying it forward by trying to support some of the coffee shops and the restaurants that you love so dearly that are closed at the moment. How can you help them by going and maybe buying coffees for the future or buying meals for the future? And how can we pay it forward as humans? So we are seeing this incredible unity coming out in all nations, which is really, really inspiring to see. And I just want to say that tonight we're going to be focusing on an Ask Me Anything session with David Roberts. And I just want to give a huge special thanks to David for taking the time to do this. We've had a great friendship over the last couple of years, and we have learned so much from you. And thank you so much, David. Just to quickly dive into about Singularity University, our mission is to educate, empower, and inspire leaders about exponential technologies and how to solve some of the world's grand challenges. We are forming this unique model at SingularityU South Africa, where we want to future-proof Africa and build this global community of change makers that can use these technologies to try and make South Africa, and the world a better place. Our journey started off in 2017 with our inaugural summit, and we have built an incredible community over the last 3 years. In 2018, we laid the foundation, and in 2019, we went exponential as partners with Singularity University, where we did two executive programs, 2 large summits, and various custom programs for organizations. And we have our Singularity University South Africa Summit coming on October 14th and 15th this year, which we are looking greatly forward to hopefully getting everyone together again, or possibly might be some type of virtual reality environment or a combination of both, as well as our custom programs we do with organizations, with our incredible faculty who are experts in their fields in various sectors. And we have our executive program coming up in November. And I just want to quickly say a special shout out to our partners who without them, none of this would be possible, and that we are eternally grateful for to really helping us drive this future-proof Africa mission in collaboration with the Development Bank of Southern Africa, who's our collaboration partner, and their mission is to really create positive impact and drive Africa's prosperity. Our global partner, Deloitte, who's been on the journey with us since the beginning in South Africa and is a global partner with Singularity for many years, who really is committed to also really pushing digital transformation on this continent. And a big special thanks to MTN, our strategic partner, who has also been with us since the beginning of this journey and is Africa's largest mobile network. And to the people at MTN, thank you so much for your commitment and your drive to really trying to make South Africa a better place. So, and then just one last shout out to ManMade and to V-Hive, to the team who put this together. It's taken us quite a lot of time to actually work this out, this new format. So thanks to the team for all the hard work and the effort, and to V-Hive, which is a virtual reality eventing platform to host any meeting, conference, or training in a unique space like this, where you feel like you're playing a game and you're in a physical space. So thanks to you guys for helping putting this together. Lastly, just follow us on social media. We do post daily on all social platforms. It's Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And this is currently being streamed on YouTube. Thanks to everyone watching on the YouTube stream. I hope that it's clear and you're going to enjoy the Ask Me Anything session. With that, we're going to kick in. I'm going to welcome Mr. David Roberts, who is regarded as one of the world's top experts on disruptive innovation and exponentially advancing technologies. His passion is to help transform the lives of 1 billion suffering people in the world through disruptive innovation. David served as the Vice President of Singularity University and two-time Director of the Graduate Studies Program. He is an award-winning CEO and serial entrepreneur, has started ventures backed with over $100 million of investment from Kleiner Perkins, Vinod Khosla, Cisco, Oracle, Accenture, and QTEL, just to name a few. David is also the chairman at 1Qubit, the world's first software company for quantum computers. He's probably the leader in the space. He's a formal advisor of Made in Space, which makes 3D printers in space, as well as he is the founder of JEDI training program, JEDI with a G, which looks at intensive extreme human performance training. With that, I want to welcome Mr. David Roberts to the stage. How's it, David? Thanks for joining us. I'm a bit lower than you.
Mick, it's awesome to be here, and thank you for having me. And blessings to everyone. I hope you're all safe. I think that's probably the most important thing for all of us.
Yes, and David, if you want to face the front here, we were together at the end of March, and when we finished our executive program in the first week of March, and this thing was just unfolding, and you predicted a lot of these things that have happened, these global lockdowns and a lot of the things. How's it panned out for you, and where do you think we are now with COVID?
Yeah, it's good. And even before I just touch on that, I'm so glad that we did this virtually, because I remember in around 1995, a physician friend of mine had brought me over to his house, into his basement, because he wanted to show me something that he was doing on his computer. And this was in Aspen, Colorado then. And I remember going down in the basement with him, and he spent a couple hours with me, showing me this thing that he had called the World Wide Web. And it was this new computing technology, and I hadn't seen it before. And what I remembered is that I didn't really get it. I didn't understand it fully. And when I left his house, I remembered thinking that eventually people were going to find out that he was getting on other people's computers. Like, I just didn't understand what it meant. And now in hindsight, that moment feels so special. And I think today, this moment for many of us will be remembered 25, 30 years into the future, just like this, where we got into this little virtual world, and it didn't work quite well, and it was kind of awkward and strange, and we had troubles with the buttons and moving around. And we'll remember this moment, because many of us, I know, it is the first time that they've done that. So getting back to your question about this panning out, it's been interesting for me, because I think there certainly was an expectation that something like this was going to happen. And I know we talked about it quite a bit. And I think we've done better in some ways and much worse in some ways. But I think overall, individually, not in terms of governments, individually, I think we've done extremely well. Things could absolutely be much, much worse. And I know people are thinking, how could it be worse than this? And it really could. It could be much, much worse. So, what's interesting is just that this is so different for us, because in most kinds of events like this, we've experienced them before. And so there's a playbook for leaders. If there's a tsunami, or if there's a if there's an explosion, or if there's, we've been through that, and so people know roughly what to do after it, and it occurs in a single moment in time. And so even though it's a catastrophic event, I think leaders perform well in those circumstances because the event has happened in the past, and now they're doing what they do best, which is being decisive, which is what good leaders do. But this is not like that. It's not like that. And it's not like that because the events keep unfolding. We don't know what's going to happen next. And I think this is what's caused things to be so challenging, I think, for leaders, is they're uncertain what is actually involved here. And we keep learning new things each week. Things are different because of things we've learned that changes everything. That's what I think is so different, and I think what people are really struggling with.
And what do you think some of the traits that leaders should have? I mean, we see from that opening video that some of the leaders are, like the New Zealand president and our own president, Cyril, are showing these amazing leadership qualities. Well, what are some of the traits you think leaders should have now?
Yeah. The most important one, I think, so this is this situation where, it's just this continuously moving problem. And in circumstances like that, being a leader that is truthful, I think ends up being the most critical characteristic and leadership trait. And this is why. Leaders generally have a tendency towards, say, making things look better than they are. Sometimes they have a tendency towards making things look worse than they are. But regardless of the tendencies, if they are not extremely truthful in times of uncertainty, as the events unfold, people quickly realize whether they were truthful or not. And so because people quickly realize whether they were truthful or not, they either gain or lose confidence in the leader very, very quickly. And so truthfulness ends up being the pivotal characteristic, because the minute they think that you're not being truthful and there's still unknown events to occur, they won't believe you about anything. Yes. And I think we're seeing that. We're seeing that around the world. And it's been difficult, I think, for many leaders. But for others, yes, I think they've shown. One of the things in your video was how, the leader in New Zealand, how she reduced the salaries of the government by 20% during this time. And what an extraordinary leadership action I think that is.
Yes, from the top.
Yeah. It immediately imparts a sense of sharing equally this problem together. And she clearly didn't have to do that. And I think most of the leaders in the world have chosen not to do that. But I think for her, it instills enormous confidence. And because of actions like that, she has gained, I think, the trust of the people in New Zealand and the respect of other leaders in the world, because she set such an example of that.
And what's really great is the way she's, with that truthfulness, and she's communicating really well. She's constantly communicating with the people from New Zealand around what's happening, what's the next steps.
And the communication, whenever people are stressed, you want to be communicating with them even more. And in fact, I would recommend, as leaders of any of the companies that you have, you should be communicating at least every 2 or 3 days, preferably every day. And sometimes even saying the same thing over and over, because sometimes people need to hear it several times to register. Harvard Business School recently had a session about COVID, and it was really interesting. One of the pivotal leaders that they brought up, and I liked it because of who he was. And if you're not familiar, there's a guy by the name of John Boyd, and he was an Air Force officer in the United States. But he's one of the most famous, and I was an Air Force officer for 20 years. And one of the things that he's responsible for is the strategy of dogfighting. And the reason that Harvard Business School brought him up was that he cracked the idea of what do you do in situations, in circumstances that constantly keep changing. And in his circumstance, he was dealing with fighter pilots, and they were in the Korean War. And in the beginning of the war, we were not doing very well in dogfights, and no one really could understand and crack why. And he studied it and had an extraordinary insight in it. And his insight was something called the Ooda Loop. And I actually believe that for leaders, studying the Ooda Loop is the most important thing that you could do right now in terms of gaining a new insight to deal with situations that keep changing and unfolding. And what he realized, and Ooda stands for observe, orient, decide, and act. And what he realized is he was dealing with this situation where if you're a fighter pilot and you're sort of heading out towards enemy space, and then you have this enemy target that shows up on your radar that's coming at you, well, you don't know a lot yet. You don't know what it is. You don't know who it is. You don't know how bad of a threat it is. And so the old strategy used to be to just have your wingmen fly as fast as they can straight into them to see what it was. And often, as a result of that, you know, they might get shot down, or you might get shot down, because you would then realize what it was. You'd realize it was a threat, and then you were responding to the threat. So you were always behind the enemy. The enemy was acting, and you were always responding. And what he realized in this observe, orient, decide, and act was that you want to start acting right away, but in little increments, in little bits, with the little knowledge that you have. And so here's an example of one of the things he learned. When you see this thing showing up on the radar ahead of you, rather than wait, rather than just send a fighter in like you usually would to find out, you could do things even before that. For example, you could just start climbing. And if you started to climb right away, and then your threat started to climb right away also, you could presume that they were coming after you. Because someone that was just, say, heading in your direction wouldn't suddenly also start climbing because you started to climb. And so now you would have even more information, and now your enemy was now responding to you. And so the idea that he realized was that if you act inside of this Ooda Loop, if you observe and orient and decide and act even faster than the threat now is responding to you. And so the way you can think about this in terms of COVID is most leaders are waiting for the news. They're waiting for the next news. And so then they get some news, and the news might be, we're going to go into a lockdown. Or the news might be, you have to wear masks. And the news might be, and you keep learning the news, and then you keep responding to the news. And I want you to think about the countries that responded. They heard about, say, this disease in Wuhan. And so, you know, they maybe started looking into it more, but they could have responded right away. And leaders can respond right away. They could have decided, well, let's start wearing masks. Let's keep coming to work, but let's start wearing masks now. And so now you get inside of the Ooda Loop. So you're now responding a little bit faster than the events themselves are unfolding. And I think that is the single most important skill set that a leader can have when they're in these environments that are changing quite rapidly.
Oh, so thanks for that. So David, just somebody asked, I think Enzo asked it, is it Ooda? Do you spell it O-O-D-A? Ooda Loop.
Yeah, it's O-O-D-A, and Colonel Boyd's name is spelled B-O-Y-D. And yeah.
Okay, fantastic. I think some people are trying to ask some questions in the room. I heard some voices. We've got Nikki from Greece over here. We've got Christina from Australia, and there's a couple of other people in the audience. Did anyone want to ask a question now?
Fantastic. And if you're wondering, you may be in a different room. We actually have many rooms, and so people are in different rooms. And if you're wondering why those people are not in your room, it's because we're all in a different room, and that's how we've made it just for the system to set up and deal with this many people with us today. Hi, Nikki. Nice to see you there.
So,
Hi, Mick. Great to see you guys.
Hi, Nikki. So, yeah, as David was saying, that the way it works is that there's a limit to how many people we can put in each room. Because of the virtual reality, it pulls a lot of computer power from your own individual computers. So that the more people that are in a room, if there's too many people, it slows down the performance. Like similar to how they did this, Fortnite just did this Travis Scott concert now on the weekend. Last weekend they had 15 million people taking part in a virtual reality concert in Fortnite. And the way they do it is they have thousands of rooms running with multiple servers, with about up to 100 people in each room enjoying the concert. So we were using a similar technique to the way they're doing it. Nikki, you had a question?
I can have one. I want to ask David, so this challenge of the pandemic, what is the biggest inspiration about humanity it has given you?
You know, I have a number of inspirations from it, and I love that question, Nikki. My belief is that we're all sort of here on this earth to learn something that maybe we somehow couldn't learn any other way. And so we become better by being challenged. I mean, people with extraordinary character have typically been through extraordinary challenges. And so, you know, as leaders, one of the mistakes I think we make is we start to think that we're there only to solve specific kinds of problems. And suddenly when a new problem comes up that is somehow outside of the kinds of problems we think we're supposed to deal with, we're challenged and troubled by it. But I think as leaders, we're supposed to step up to any kind of challenge, even the unexpected ones. And this is not completely an unexpected one, but I think for most of us in the world, it's a very unexpected challenge. And how we behave, it is an opportunity for us to do what we're supposed to do, which is lead. This is the time for us to step up and be the leader, and not just be the leader. This is a time where we get to step up and demonstrate our compassion, our courage, our helpfulness. You know, it's moments like these that present the opportunities for us to excel. Because if we can only excel when things are roughly predictable and the same, well, I mean, any bozo can do that. So I'm inspired by all the stories of how people have stepped up. And, you know, it's not just amongst leaders, it's even the smallest things that I've seen going into a grocery store and watching the kinds of things that can happen there. It's a moment for all of us. And I'm actually, I think if you ask me, gee, what was the single best thing that I've seen. I don't know that I have a single best one. I mean, there's just a whole set of moments that I'm sure all of us have seen, where we get to see kind of a little bit of the worst sometimes of humanity, but also the best. And it's these moments of the best that I think have been so memorable.
Thanks. David, in terms of how do we think of disruption in this context?
Well, you know, we've been speaking for a long time about self-disruption. And, you know, unless you're in the business maybe of making toilet paper or some other very needed product, your business has been, you know, negatively impacted. And but this is not I believe this is not a short-term problem. And I know perhaps people have been hearing that this is just a momentary thing, and that, you know, next week or the week after, the week or next month we'll be back to business as usual. I don't believe that is going to play out to be an accurate prediction of the future. We're going to be dealing with this for the next couple of years in different ways. And so if you've been coming to, you know, Singularity events, and I certainly appreciate the ones that the Mann brothers have been putting on in South Africa, you know, we've already shared with you a lot of the skills around self-disruption and exponential technology and self-change. And now we're forced into it. So maybe before, we were hoping that many of you would think about how to disrupt yourselves and how to change into a new business, but now you might find yourself forced into it. And so hopefully you listened, but even if you didn't, it's never too late to learn. And, you know, the challenges with self-disruption are very, very different than innovation or than disrupting another business. It's very different. And just to highlight what we talked about before, in innovation, you're looking to do the same things better. You keep looking to do the things that you're already doing and how to improve them. Disruption is not that. It is a mistake to think that disruption and innovation are even closely related. They are as different as two completely different things. In disruption, you're trying to make the things that you were doing before, the things that you kept getting better at, you're trying to make those obsolete. You're not just trying to do something new, you're trying to make what you were doing before obsolete. So,
yes,
you know, if you think you're in the business of, say, speaking to large audiences, well, that's not going to happen for a long time. And so now the need to disrupt yourselves, if you're in that business, whatever business you're in, you need to disrupt yourself. And when you disrupt yourself, the challenge is that you've got all these people that still want the old thing to be around, and they will fight it in a variety of ways. They will resist it. They will cause actions to occur that make it difficult now to make the very change that is needed most, which is to do away with the thing that you used to do. And so the process of doing that is the critical skill. It's often clear, sometimes it's not even clear what you're supposed to do next, but it's often clear, I think, what to do next. You know, we've talked a little about that being, you know, like the Oz, knowing where Oz is, knowing what Oz is like in The Wizard of Oz. You can get that, you can communicate the vision, but it is the yellow brick road, how easy that path is, that determines whether or not you ever get there. So,
yes.
So this is the skill that we have to learn, and that we're already good at it. For many of us that we've been attending these things, you've already learned a great deal about how you go about self-disruption, and now we're just accelerated into it faster and perhaps in an unexpected way.
Yeah, I mean, you're seeing so many people just really being agile and adaptable to what their current positions and jumping into other skills and learning new things. And my friend goes from being a diamond dealer to a mask seller, and you've got companies that are I know two companies that have joined forces. One that is a skincare product company, and another that is a steel maker, Hendler. They make kitchenware, and they've joined forces to make a new type of ventilator to try help during COVID, which I thought was really incredible.
Yes, and so, the anxiety of the COVID situation happens because of the uncertainty that leaders feel. But what I think they have to remember, the place to put your confidence is in the leadership. It's in the process of dealing with these kinds of things. That's in this process of self-disruption. That's where your confidence comes from the process, because the Ooda Loop is a process. And you can become confident about getting good at the Ooda Loop and about making these incremental changes quickly, even before you've heard the news. You can get confident in that, and you can get confident in leadership, and you can get confident in the process of change. Those things are the places that we should put our confidence in, and with that, we lose the anxiety of constant surprise.
Yes.
David, can I ask a question? You've mentioned anxiety and leadership, and we've spoken with a lot of people who are suffering anxiety because of all the uncertainty. All the conspiracy theories are also adding to that anxiety. How do you suggest, as leaders, people kind of deal with the anxiety that's coming with the conspiracy theories, but how do we sort through the truth in all of this?
Yeah. Hi, Christina, and thank you for that. I think I know I've heard people, I don't know why, but many people come to me with the conspiracy theories thinking I know the answers to them, and I don't. I mean, some of them have become known to us. I think this is a time where science matters. There's times in human situations where science, I think, perhaps does not play as well. But in situations like this, science matters a lot. And the theory behind science is around this idea about truth and about how we get to it. And that truth is actually quite narrow. It's very narrow. And so if truth is narrow, and that we have concepts around truth, in science, the least valued kind of information is self-observation. That is the least valued. So if I say I saw a UFO, that is actually the least valued form of information as to whether or not something I saw came from an alien planet with aliens on board. Right? What science would like is for me maybe to have taken a piece of the alien ship and brought it back with me while I was on it. That would be something that could be, perhaps more valued in science. And so, in COVID, one of the things, for example, I've heard is, well, this was an engineered virus. And who knows where that started. But in science, we can actually look at the molecular makeup of the RNA molecule of COVID. And we actually have, because of prior research, the RNA sequence of these diseases from bats, for example. And we can look and see, there's a 93% match with a bat. And then we can look and see there's another very strange animal that looks a little bit like an anteater. And we can see that there's, I think it's a 97% match with bats, and it's a 93% match with a pangolin. And so we can look at it and see that it matches and that it's not engineered. Because if it was engineered, then somebody would have had to have gone back in time, and engineered this for bats and for pangolins, which clearly no one, would have done. And even that we can see is related. And so the science of it tells us that this is a naturally occurring virus. And so if you trust in science, if you trust in this idea of peer-reviewed information, of data, and of looking at data and presenting it for everyone else to see, and then perform the same tests themselves, if you trust in that process, I think that is where our confidence should go. And, I have worked for organizations that have actually been involved sometimes in creating these kinds of things, and there are ways to determine truth, and so the key thing is to not make too many assumptions, or to, at least when you make an assumption, know that it's just an assumption. That's the key thing, is to know, well, what's truth, what's an observation, and what is science. So for example, if I have cancer and then I eat a lot of mushrooms and my cancer is cured, that doesn't mean that the mushrooms cured my cancer. And even if the mushrooms did cure my cancer, that is not proof yet that mushrooms cure cancer for everyone else. So our trust, I believe, in science is really critical. And when we hear about these rumors that create fear, that maybe they are true, but let's at least make sure that we've taken the time to know the truth, or become a lot closer to it.
No, thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
So thanks, David. We've got quite a number of questions coming through from YouTube and from various rooms. Just one that came through now from Anu Singh, who you know from MTN. She said, "Hi, Dave.
Oops, we lost you for a moment there. Yeah, Mick, I can't hear you. Mick, you got cut off for a moment there. Could you start the question again?
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me now?
Yes, and it's good to see that even in the virtual world, we will have AV problems.
Yeah, exactly. We've got our cameraman shouting at me here that no one could hear me, so I also got the word from them.
Yeah, just start again. We hear you now.
So Anu Singh from MTN had just asked a question, who's a good friend who you know.
Yes.
Hi, Dave. Being a global nomad and a seasoned leader who has worked in many environments, where would you essentially self-disrupted through career and lifestyle changes? What has been your own challenge in getting through this period, and how have you managed this?
Yeah. So when have I been self-disrupted, and how am I doing through this period? Yeah. So, one of the things I've looked at in my past life is when it was that I changed the main thing that I was doing, say, with work. And many of us have done that. Many of us have not worked for the same organization our whole life. And it's a worthwhile exercise to think about when you changed and why. And sometimes the change was forced upon us, but sometimes it was not. And I think it's interesting to look at the times that it was not forced upon us. because those times to me are when we exhibited a form of self-disruption. And it's not just with work. If you think about habits that have changed, I think those are extraordinary, say habits of eating or diet or exercise, or like at some time these changed in our life. And it's quite interesting to look at how we gain the self-leadership to change ourselves. And often it comes, at least in my case, often just from something I hear or see where I believe that something, or even I, can do something better and have perhaps greater positive impact, or put myself into a situation where I would learn even more at a faster pace. But perhaps to do that, to have to take on some level of, I'll call it suffering or pain, in order to learn even more. The interesting thing is, how do we get to this lingering thought that there's something bigger or better for us? And then when do we make the change? How do we go about making the change? And for most of us, what I've learned, if I talk to somebody, say, that used to smoke cigarettes and then they never did, often I find that they quit for a while and then they went back to it. And they quit for a while and they went back to it. And so they had actually taken several times to try, but there was a moment where they never went back to it. And that moment literally is a moment. It's a moment. Like, there was one day where they never went back. And so change, to me, is not often gradual. It is gradually occurring, but it's much more like hitting a rock. And so if you hit a rock with a hammer, it looks like nothing happens, and you hit it again and nothing happens and nothing happens. But because you keep hitting it, one day it breaks. I think change in people happens like that. Incrementally, we keep adding, like a flywheel. We keep adding, we keep hitting it, it keeps spinning faster and faster. But one day it spins off the top. And this is how we change organizations, I believe. The best way we change organizations is we do a little incremental bit each day. It's what Boyd was saying in the Ooda Loop, is you make these incremental changes, but over time they add up. And then suddenly, in a moment, you're something different. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, how have you personally managed with this challenge?
Yeah, I mean, it's a complete transformation for me. And, you know, what's interesting is when this started, I was in South Africa. Yeah. And I remember, because we talked about it, and we were looking and watching what was happening in the world. And I was speaking about what I thought were the inevitable aspects of this spread and an eventual lockdown. And, you know, and when we were in South Africa, if you remember, suddenly one person got COVID. You remember that?
Yes.
And I said, well, now will be a determining moment, because we're either going to learn soon that 2 people have it, or it's just going to be 1. And then it went to 2. And I said, well, it's again a determining moment as to whether it'll be 4 soon or whether it'll be 2. And of course, then it got to 4, and then it got to 8. And then I said, I've seen this pattern, this sequence before. And I think South Africa acted quickly. And shortly after that, if you remember, I left and I went to the United Kingdom. And when I got to the United Kingdom, the bars and the restaurants were still crowded and full, like nothing was happening. And the government's response was so slow. And so now, you know, the United Kingdom is one of the top 5 in deaths in the world. And all of it could have been avoided if leaders had responded faster and sooner. But South Africa responded quite quickly, and I'm quite grateful for it. The challenge in this future now is this. In fact, I left the United Kingdom and I flew to Silicon Valley, where Silicon Valley was the first in the United States to do a lockdown. They just did a lockdown right away. And I said, this has got to be one of the safest places now in the world because of this lockdown. The challenge is in realizing the truth about this, which is flattening the curve is not a cure to our problem. It slows down the inevitable. It removes the excessive deaths that happen by peaking the healthcare system. But flattening the curve still does not stop the people that may get it and die from it from happening. It spreads that out. But because it spreads it out, it gives us the time that we need to figure out ways to prevent people that might die from it from dying from it. And it gives us the time, perhaps, for a vaccine to occur, which I'm not very hopeful on right now, only because, MERS and SARS, and I think 1/3 of the, say, 300 different common colds that we have, they're all coronaviruses, and we have not yet figured out a vaccine. So it wasn't out of a lack of effort, but because now there's such a massive global effort, we have a much greater chance of those breakthroughs to happen. But it does require some breakthroughs. It's not just a matter of doing the work. And so now here I am in California under a lockdown, and we've had to change how we communicate. And this is one of the things that we're experimenting with. And there's a whole set of them that we're experimenting with. And we, like everyone else, are forced to think about, well, how can we still create change? How can we still train leaders? How can we educate leaders? How can we create and accelerate the speed of organizational change? And this is just one of the mechanisms that we're experimenting with to do that. Experimentation ends up being really critical.
No, thanks so much for that. We've got quite a number of questions. I'm going to just keep moving along some of the people. We've got a question from Nitesh Ramatar. He says, "Dear David, which industries do you think that is mostly affected by this pandemic will have to evolve? Which industries are most affected by this pandemic and will have to evolve?"
Yeah, and so I'll answer more quickly too, just so we can get through a lot of the questions. This is a threat that affects everyone: competitors, suppliers, governments, businesses, not-for-profits. The threat is the same for all of us. And so we're all affected by it. Any business that is dependent upon people meeting strangers in person in close contact will be affected. There's no escaping that. And every secondary and tertiary connection to that, which means, if you're not going to get materials because people are dependent on meeting, or all of those will be negatively impacted. Every business that doesn't require that will not be as impacted, and every business that encourages a system that avoids that, such as this one, such as video teleconferencing, will actually increase because of the shift towards it. So, we see a variety of complete standstills of businesses, from airlines to anything involving a conference, to even a one-on-one type business. Just going to the dentist now takes on a very new level of danger. But we will pass it. I mean, make no mistake, it is temporary, and even if we're under this for a year, and maybe some of these impacts will last for 2, we're going to get past this.
No, thanks for that. We've got another question from Sharon Rowe Farista, who is asking, what is the currency of the post-COVID world? I think it's masks at the moment. But what is the currency of the post-COVID world as we see oil markets crash, formal economies being questioned, and the trajectory of careers get more unpredictable? What is the constant other than change?
Yeah, it's beautiful. The constant is adaptability. It's adaptability. If you're unable to adapt, you'll experience pain and suffering. And it's no different than, what Darwin told us a long time ago, that, those species that adapt are the ones that survive. And he especially meant it in periods of change. And we're in a extreme period of change. And so we have to adapt. That's it. And adaptability is a skill just like any other. And it's a learned skill. It's one you can learn. But much of adaptability is very much about experimentation, experimenting rapidly, experimenting with low consequence and cost, and having as many experiments as possible that you can afford without great pain, and then to accelerate very quickly on things that are successful. That's innovation. And then the disruption happens when you have done an experiment and you recognize that that experiment should replace the thing that you've been doing. And how quickly you can move into that and how smoothly you can move into that is your adaptability.
Awesome. And I think this experiment that we're trying now is an exact example of what you've just mentioned. It's, you're ready, from the next iteration, as for our next event, we will, really advance in great ways. We have another question from Daniel McCarley from Silica, and he's asking, David, what's your view on UBI? Do you think UBI will be speeded up because of COVID? Universal basic income?
Yeah. So the implementation of UBI matters. If UBI is not implemented well, it's a horrific idea. In fact, if it's not implemented well, UBI can look a lot like extreme socialism or communism. If it's implemented really well, UBI has the potential, especially in a future where a lot of people are working from home and needing to reinvent themselves. For many countries, they're experiencing massive, truly massive unemployment. And UBI provides a small mechanism for people to experiment. But microloans are also very effective. And in some ways, microloans might be more effective than UBI because it creates a responsibility and a little bit more pressure to succeed. And getting more money in microloans is greatly determined by whether or not you did something useful with your first tiny microloan. And if you did, then you get even more money. And so the implementation of it, I think, is what matters. Using it as a universal solution without the specifics of the implementation, I think, can be quite risky and dangerous. And so it just depends on the specific implementation of it as to whether or not I think it could be helpful or useful. In some weird way, we are witnessing UBI. It's just not called that. So like in the United States, when we are giving out money to businesses and they're, say, loans that never have to be repaid, that's actually UBI. It just doesn't sound like it because we said it was a loan that didn't have to be repaid. And so during hard times, if you don't want a total collapse, you need, since the problem is temporary, if the problem was permanent, you would never do this, but since the problem is temporary, you don't want businesses necessarily to collapse completely because the effort level to restart them is so great, is so much higher. And so governments are encouraged right now to provide sustenance so that businesses don't totally collapse. And it's good for them because it means the recovery is better, and then those successful businesses are able to pay the taxes back to the government that provided them with the help during the hard times. Okay, next. Good question.
I think in South Africa, we're also doing something similar to that, where we've just, our president announced a stimulus package for us, which could also be seen as a UBI, I guess.
Yes. Yes, that's right. And the key with the stimulus is to understand the timing, right? In the US, I think we may have overestimated the recovery time, the recovery period. We thought it was going to be very, very brief. And so we did a stimulus, and then we realized, oh, it's longer than we thought. We had to do another stimulus. And we realized, oh, it's longer than we thought. We had to do another stimulus. So the key, I think, in stimuluses is to actually not make them a single instrument where the monetary receival is in a single lump. It's not spent so well if it's done that way. Better is more of a stream that people can somewhat depend on while they maintain minimal operations so that they can come back up when things start to improve and get better.
No, thanks for that. So we're going to take two more questions. We'll take one from the room if there's a question from the room, and then we'll take one more from online. Has anyone got a question in the room here? Is that Aaron?
Yeah. Hey, Mick and David. Thanks for taking the time out to share your thoughts and everything. And I'm really inspired just hearing, a bit of what you're talking about in terms of remaining adaptable. I actually, the question I had goes back to something that you said at the very beginning, and it's less related to the leadership content and more about something that you said related to, we may look back on the development of worlds like this, and you compared it to your experience of the first time that you were exposed to the World Wide Web, and how your initial reaction is that it seems unlikely that this would become such a foundational part of our lives. I was curious, and I know this question is rooted more about the technology because David, I know you and I have talked a lot about the development of virtual reality and something that a lot of us are curious about. I was wondering if there are any lessons in the development of the World Wide Web as it moved, from the mid-90s when you first saw it to, the way that we see it function today, how that development occurred, how it was adopted across society, and if there's any lessons in that journey that might inform us about what we can expect in terms of how immersive virtual spaces like this might, be adopted, when they may, like what's needed for them to become more mainstream and widely used, or any other ideas that you learned from watching the World Wide Web that can inform us about what to expect from immersive spaces like these.
Yes, and Aaron, it's great to have you here, and certainly your experiences and expertise in virtual reality, and I know we have had a few conversations like this. So this is wonderful for everybody to be here experiencing this. When I remember looking at that World Wide Web, I just couldn't get it. I couldn't make the projection into the future as to what the World Wide Web would become. It was difficult to do. And I'm an MIT computer scientist and engineer, and I still could not, foresee what was about to happen. Having had that experience now, and us having watched sort of the last 30 years, I hope now we have a better idea of what is about to happen with this. Today we sit in this room with, without legs and with relatively frozen heads, and you're still in a bumblebee body. The future cannot be like that. It will not be like that. Virtual reality unlike reality, will keep getting better. It will keep getting better. And because it keeps getting better, it means that the constraints that we have, even the ones that we think we have, will go away. And so now, it means that, we've created this room to look like a familiar experience, but, in the future, we will be able to do things that we could not even do even in reality. Even in reality. In other words, virtual reality, at some point, it gets better than even reality could get. And so we can, I'm sitting in Santa Cruz, California today, and a trip to South Africa is almost a day away on a dangerous plane. But because we're in virtual reality, I can snap my finger, I can be there in a second. And, if we want to, you can type /FLY into that box below, and all of us can fly. We can fly. And so I understand that the future means not that this just improves to finally equal reality. The future means that the reality isn't even what we can imagine. It will not mirror what we've done in the real world. If we grasp that, we understand the concept of disruption as it applies to our reality. We will not make virtual reality just to look like reality. Virtual reality will become something that reality could never have become. And it will allow us to communicate in extraordinary, unimaginable ways. And it will allow us to experience things that we could never have experienced in reality. And if we grasp that, we get a glimpse of what is going to happen in the next 15 to 20 years. And my belief is that virtual reality disrupts reality. We don't get both. This is bizarre. It's bizarre to think about it. We don't get both. Cars disrupted horses. We didn't end up with cars and horses and car lanes and horse lanes. And electric cars disrupt gas cars. We're not going to end up with both. We're just going to end up with electric autonomous cars. And so if you get disruption, what we're experiencing today in virtual reality is the most extreme case, which is that humanity eventually ends up in here. And that, I think, is one of the hardest things for me to grasp, that the future of humanity ends up in something even greater than the reality that we're currently experiencing. And that is as inevitable as, what we witness with the World Wide Web becoming the internet.
So interesting. Thanks so much for that, David. I mean, for me, personally, it's very exciting what you're saying. I mean, being able to travel into these virtual worlds and disrupt reality just sounds like a great evolution. We are really running out of time, though, so I want to ask you two more short questions. The one is from Garth Smith from Silica, and he asks, "Dear David, do you think that this will increase or decrease the size of the role of governments in the future?"
That is a very interesting question I have not thought about. What's been clear so far is that governments have exercised authorities that in many cases were not even possible before. In fact, many of them have enacted emergency clauses. Some of these emergency clauses were designed and built ahead of time in case of nuclear war, in case of truly a global war, for example. And many governments have actually had to enact those in order to force, say, a company to make more masks, or to keep drilling oil, or to do things that they otherwise would not have done. I don't know the answer. And I think I don't know it because in challenging circumstances, governments, just like people, can move in either direction. Just because, say, really difficult, challenging, maybe even bad things happen to someone when they were a kid, it doesn't mean that they become a bad person later on. In fact, it doesn't mean that they become a good person. In fact, both things happen. Governments, like people, have free will. And whether they choose to grow in size or as a result choose to reduce in size is still up to them. But I believe that governments today have so much power and so much authority that we will see them increase mostly in size. And they will increase in size not just because it allows them to help more people, but unfortunately there is a natural trend for things that have power to slowly over time increase their power. And whether that is a good or bad thing, I don't know. I guess it depends on your perspective and your beliefs about the role of government in our society. But it's a question, I guess we'll get to witness it unfold and certainly witness it, the trend of it greatly over the next couple of years. Should we do some just closing comments, or do we have one other question you wanted to get to?
We've got one more question from Anu. This will be the last question. In a situation like this, how important is a leader's speed of repossessed versus managing accuracy and panic?
How important is a leader's speed? I missed that first part.
How important is a leader's speed of repossessed versus managing accuracy and panic?
Of repossessed versus accuracy and panic. I'm probably not sure I still understand that question about the speed of repossessed. But it sounds like... Sorry, go ahead.
Just give me a second. I'm just getting the update on the question. Speed of response. Sorry, speed of response. How important is a leader's speed of response versus managing accuracy and panic?
Yeah. And that's the trend that I was speaking about with the Ooda Loop. See, if you wait to respond to everything, you'll be behind the Ooda Loop. You'll be behind it. You'll be reactive. Being reactive is not leadership. Anybody can be reactive. Any manager can be reactive, and managers should be reactive. But managers are not leaders. If you want to be a leader, leaders mean that you start to get ahead of the reaction. Rather than waiting for the next thing, you're thinking about what the next thing might be, and then you're making an incremental change right away. You're not waiting. And you don't want to push too much because you might be wrong about some things, but you can make some decisions now. Let me give you a quick example of that. Most places in the world, even though this has happened, one, recognize this is not going to be the first time we're going to have a big pandemic. I'm surprised that it's actually taken this long for us to have this one. But the next one might be worse. Can you imagine if this was MERS, where the death rate was 40%? And so knowing that this isn't the first one, if you have a business and you still have, door handles in the business, well, maybe this is the time to start getting rid of things that everyone's touching together. And clearly we went to bathrooms that did that, where you don't have to touch the faucet. You don't have to touch. Well, now's a good time. Prepare now. Get ahead of the curve. If you're waiting for the business to come back and for people to all come back into work, well, maybe you get ahead of that curve. And maybe now you start creating new kinds of ventilation systems, new kinds of seating, new requirements. Get ahead of the curve. Be the leader. And you're the leader by acting quickly and incrementally with what information you have. And I think as we do that more, we will not feel like we're the victim, because victims wait. And leaders act first, incrementally, testing constantly, seeing results, and accelerating the tests that have worked out well.
David, thanks so much for that. That was really inspiring and hugely insightful. I think we've run out of time. Do you want to leave us with any closing comments?
Yes. I think my closing comment is just to remember and recognize that we have all been trained for this. Most of the people in the rooms that people are in today in these virtual rooms are leaders. Just because the problem is new does not mean you're unprepared for the problem. We're leaders because we're good at problem solving. We're good at creating new processes. We're good at creating positive, effective cultures. We're good at educating, developing, and creating other leaders. COVID doesn't change any of that. We get paid as leaders and rewarded as leaders because we deal with problems, and just because they're problems that we didn't expect, or just because they're problems that keep unfolding with uncertainty, doesn't mean that we are unprepared. Everything that we've learned has prepared us for this. Step up and remember that this is what we're good at. This is our role. This is our purpose. Step up and be the leader. Fast, incremental, positive changes that leave us not from being victims, but lead us into, as John Boyd would put it, observe, orient, decide, act. We get inside the threat decision cycle and we gain advantage. Faster tempo, faster rhythm. We are the surprise. We allow the chaos to become part of the system and we use it to our advantage. I give my blessings to all of you as leaders. I ask you to stay safe, but also, most importantly, to do what it is that we do well, which is lead. Lead. Thank you, Nick.
David, thank you so much for that. I really, if everyone, if you can show some gratitude, you can pull up your emojis, and you can, if you press spacebar, you can click. So we don't have actual clapping, but we can have virtual clapping. Thank you so much for that, David. That was really incredible and inspiring, and for taking the time to work with us on this experiment. We look forward to the next iterations of this as we develop very rapidly and with agility. And I love the concept of the Ooda Loop. It's such a great, it seems so simple, but just so relevant. And just by making those small progresses incrementally, just seems like there is like such a simple process, but such a powerful one. So thank you so much for sharing that. And just wanted to lastly say thanks to everyone who came here today. Thank you so much to our YouTube audience. And we will be doing many more of these V-Hive virtual events. So make sure to like our social channels to hear about more of them. And thank you to all our international guests that came. Christina, I know it's like almost 1 or 2 in the morning for you in Australia. So huge thanks to everybody, and we'll see you again soon.
Thanks so much, Mick and David. Thank you so much.
So nice to have you here.
Thanks, everybody. So that wraps up the event for today. And we will be sharing. We can actually, if we wanted to all come together here, we can take a little selfie before we leave the room. Just put up a camera. And I want to say goodbye to the people on the YouTube live stream. We're going to cut out now. You can see they're giving me the single that it's cutting out in the next few seconds. So we're going to just stick around here and take a selfie. And we'll see you guys at the next event. Thanks, everybody.